Hey everybody, this is TJR, and I'm here with my big sister, CB, who was the person who introduced me to Star Trek when I was a very young teenager.
And I have absolutely no memory of that.
Really?
Yes. TJR and I are 10 years apart.
Uh-huh.
We come from a large family. So he has fond memories that are just have totally...
That you don't have.
I don't have.
And I'll clue you in here. I can remember, of course, growing up, there was this show called Star Trek that I had zero interest in because all they did was talk. And there were no space battles. And there was no Star Wars back then. If there had been Star Wars back then, I would have been in hog heaven. But I remember you would be in the back room watching Star Trek in reruns. And I'd see you watching it. And I'd ask you, what is this show about? When does it take place? I had all these questions because Star Trek, in many respects, was kind of like Star Wars in that it doesn't tell you everything right away. You're kind of just dumped into this universe. You don't immediately know who the Federation is or what century it's taking place. And you answered all those questions. You said, oh, it's the 23rd century. You know, you told me about the United Federation of Planets. You told me about how it's a semi-military organization, Starfleet. And you kind of like gave me the backstory that I needed to understand it better.
So about what date do you think this took place?
I would have been a young teenager, like junior high school age.
Okay,
maybe.
So I would have graduated from college by then. And college is where I first started watching Star Trek.
Okay.
I did not see it when it was first on TV, except for one episode, which I saw when I was at my aunt's house babysitting.
Uh-huh.
And they had nothing to read over there.
Uh-huh.
And I must have finished my book.
And I should mention you're an avid reader.
Yes.
Okay.
They didn't even have magazines.
Uh-huh.
I turned on the television and I found Star Trek. I had heard of Star Trek before. I had never watched it because I thought, well, one of my other brothers, likes Star Trek. So obviously I don't.
Okay.
Because I was young and stupid in those days.
Uh-huh. Weren't we all?
We are all young and stupid when we're young.
Exactly.
So anyway, I did want to watch Star Trek, but I didn't want anybody to know I was watching it. So I watched one episode there. But I didn't see any other episodes until I went to college. Uh-huh. Where I fell into a group of friends in my dorm who all enjoyed watching Star Trek. They had seen it first run, and so now we were seeing it in syndication. We did not have TVs in our own dorm rooms, so we had to meet downstairs in the date rooms because I went to a women's college, and we were allowed to entertain young men in sort of a couple of parlors called date rooms, and there were TVs in there. So we would all be crowded around the TV with our dinner plates balanced on our knees, watching Star Trek together. Very communal experience. And that's how I got into it.
This was the early days of fandom then, the very earliest days.
It was the early days of fandom. It was some of the first, I think, Equicons took place then. I remember one of my friends in our little group going to Equicon, and in fact I went with her. She entered a contest to design a dress uniform for Uhura. Her design won, and so Bijo Trimble took her, and I tagged along, and a bunch of other kids to the garment district to get fabrics for these costumes that they were going to wear at Equicon. That was way back.
Can I ask now, just roughly, early 70s would this be?
I was in college from 1970 to 74.
Okay, all right, so early 70s. And let me ask you a question, because I never knew about this babysitting, this adventure in babysitting that you had. Do you remember what episode that was that you saw that time? Do you have any recollection of it?
No,
okay.
I don't.
Except
I do remember Spock was in the episode, but he was in just about every episode.
Yeah.
So,
do you remember after you saw it what your reaction at the time was? Did you think, hey, that was good? Oh, I didn't like that? Because Star Trek could be hot and cold. There could be good and bad episodes. Do you remember what your reaction was at the time?
Well, it must have been a good episode because I did want to see more. And to be honest, I don't know if this was when I was still in high school or if maybe I was babysitting during the summer when I was home from college. I suspect it was more into the high school.
Okay. But that was when it was on
era.
prime time.
Yeah.
In its initial run.
Yeah, it would have been, I was babysitting at night. It would have been prime time.
Okay. I've never known how you first got into it. But, of course, you would be home from college and I would see you watching it.
Right.
And I knew about this show, but I just couldn't grasp it because it didn't have a whole lot of monsters and people fighting space battles in it, which at that age, that's all I wanted.
Well, you must not have walked in on the right episodes because, I mean, they had Gorns.
They did, yes.
They had the salt monster.
That's right.
They had the...
and they had space battles.
Oh, and what's the silicon monster who's protecting her eggs?
I can't think of what it's called, but I know which episode you're referring to. Devil in the Dark was the name of the episode.
Right.
I remember that one. But I must have tuned in at the wrong time when they were always talking.
Yes.
And I just didn't understand. And I didn't understand what they were talking about either. I was like, what is this going on?
One of the things we discussed, because of course, being college students, we're discussing everything,
Yeah.
is that Star Trek was kind of like, in a way, a radio program. You could have the
Picture off?
You could have the picture off on Star Trek, and you could still follow the story.
Uh-huh.
But some other science fiction things, if you didn't have the picture, you wouldn't know what was going on.
I really do agree with you on that. Now, we are, of course, going to watch the original pilot. By the way, of course, we're hoping this will be maybe a once-a-month thing where we watch the original episodes in sequence and discuss them. And so this is kind of a longer introduction than you'll normally get on this show here because we're kind of introducing everything here. I just found out from you, you had done some research, and the original pilot was originally created back in 1964. Produced in 64. At least that's what to the best of our knowledge.
Well, that's what Wikipedia said.
Okay. I'm sure the internet will correct us if we're wrong.
Yes.
Because we know how the internet likes to correct people. I remember you wrote down as kind of like a question about, to kind of get us started off here. You wrote, how much science fiction had you read or watched prior to Star Trek? And how did it meet or exceed your expectations of that genre? Now, for me, my only experience with science fiction was basically Japanese monster movies, watching the Japanese anime cartoon Gigantor. And that was the extent of it. So, but now you were much more well-read, and you, I believe, read lots of science fiction. Am I right?
Yes, though I did get kind of a late start.
Uh-huh.
There wasn't much science fiction for children when I grew up, just as there wasn't much fantasy. I kind of got turned off in 6th grade to science fiction because I picked up a Heinlein Juvie from the school library and read the opening sentence, and I was so shocked. It was Citizen of the Galaxy, opens with a slave auction, that I thought, that's not for me, and I put it back on the shelf and ignored Heinlein for many years.
Okay.
But I know I was reading it in high school because we were assigned Canticle for Leibowitz in social studies class.
Which is a book I've always thought I should read.
It's very good.
Okay.
And it was the 70s, so they were trying to give us sort of loosey-goosey relevant stuff. But it was an amazing novel. I loved it. And by that time, I know I was reading things like Arthur C. Clarke and Isaac Asimov. And I suppose by that time, I might have gotten back into Heinlein Juvies, all that. That might have been when I got to college. One of my good friends there was a big Heinlein fan. Just all of the standard sort of golden age science fiction writers. So that was what I knew. Magazine stories and anthologies.
So getting back to your question, how did Star Trek meet or exceed expectations based on what you'd read as far as science fiction?
It sort of fit in with sort of classic science fiction I had read. I didn't have too much experience with science fiction movies, really hadn't seen any monster movies like you had. I was aware of them. I looked at Wikipedia, and there were apparently some science fiction series, things I had never seen as a child, like they mentioned Captain Video, Space Patrol. There was apparently a very short Buck Rogers series. My mom says that I saw something called Captain Zoom when I was very small, and I have no memory of that. I remember Astro Boy, dubbed in English, and one called Rod Rocket about, the first teenage boy in space. I was very secretive about watching them.
I see. I had no experience with any of these shows you just mentioned, but I do know about Astro Boy, but not till many decades later when I got to know more about Japanese anime. Otherwise, though, the only cartoon show that I remember as a kid was Gigantor. And that would have probably been after your time.
I was aware of it. I know the theme song because it was playing in the background.
Who doesn't know that theme song? If you can't hum the theme to Gigantor, there's something very wrong with you. Now, however, though, you listed some other live action shows. Now, of course, Twilight Zone you listed here, which I think everybody knows and we all should know.
And Twilight Zone was, 1959 to 64. And certainly I had seen some of that. I know that their Outer Limits was on maybe roughly the same time, but I never saw that because the opening music scared me.
Okay. I remember some Outer Limits, but only have vague memories. But Twilight Zone, of course, I've since become a huge Twilight Zone buff fan.
I love Twilight Zone. And series that were kind of around the time that Star Trek came out were like Lost in Space, which I think I had seen, not...
I saw a little bit of it.
Yeah, a little bit because, TV was on in the background in the house. Time Tunnel, I had seen some of those episodes. I even remember one, the World War II episode, Pearl Harbor. Land of the Giants, I was aware of it, never really watched it. And Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, ditto. And those were like, let's see. Lost in Space started in 1965, Time Tunnel 1966, Land of the Giants 1968, and Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea started in 1964. And then Star Trek started in 1966.
Yeah.
And we're going to be watching the first pilot, which was made in 1964, but I honestly don't know when it was first aired.
Well, it was never aired on TV for decades. I think in this somewhere like I have not had a chance to research this, but I know that decades later, like somewhere in the 80s, I think, they had a TV special hosted by Gene Roddenberry where he played the original pilot. Otherwise, the original pilot that we're about to talk about was only shown at conventions, at Star Trek conventions. Because this, of course, now is the pilot that did not have Captain Kirk in it.
Right.
It had Captain Christopher Pike. Mm-hmm. His second in command was a female officer named Number One, who was played by Majel Barrett, who, of course, would play Nurse Chapel in the regular series. Mm-hmm. And Spock was a smaller character in this show, but he was there. And he was also not developed yet. He was not the Spock that we know now.
No, he wasn't. And actually, they cannibalized this pre-pilot to make a two-parter in the series.
Yes, they did.
And that would have been where I first saw those scenes.
Yeah,
yes.
The Menagerie was a two-part episode, and they used segments of the original pilot, The Cage, in flashback sequences of a sort.
Right.
I'm not going to get into too much description there. But the pilot, and as it's in its entirety, was never broadcast on television. Mm-hmm. And the story is they made the pilot. It was rejected. The network said it was too cerebral, was one of the comments, which we'll talk about maybe after we watch this. They actually did the unthinkable, according to Gene Roddenberry, was they asked for a second pilot, which is, I guess, unheard of.
Yes.
Normally speaking, if a pilot fails, that's it, you're done. Mm-hmm. But the story I've heard, and this is all according to Gene Roddenberry, who likes to tell stories, or liked to tell stories, was that someone at the network said, but I really felt like I was in outer space on a ship with this crew. I really felt like it. And he felt that there was potential here. And he said, let's make another pilot. But this time there better be a lot of action and not all this heavy thinking, cerebral stuff. Mm-hmm. With that, now, we're going to watch the pilot, The Cage, the original Star Trek pilot, which is now readily available on Netflix Instant and CBS All Access and other streaming services. And, of course, is available on the Blu-ray releases of the original series as well. So we're going to go watch now, and when we come back, we'll see you all on the other side. Okay, we are back now. We've just watched the original pilot, The Cage. I'm going to ask you, can you give me, how long do you think, just roughly, how long do you think it's been since you saw this?
Gosh, I honestly do not know.
Okay. Would
Decades?
you say decades? Okay. Now, for myself, I'll be honest. Ever since this has been made available commercially, I have just watched and loved watching and rewatching this original pilot episode as many times as I can. I love this single episode version of Star Trek that we never got.
Why?
I just really like Captain Pike, and I really think that this episode is in many ways tremendously innovative television. I'll get into it more as we discuss the different points of the story as we go into it. But I love how it starts very quickly on the very first episode, setting up plot points about the different characters that you could see them expanding on later and their relationships with each other.
Right, and that's what you do in a good novel.
Yeah.
So you're getting more depth here than you would in many television series of that time. Although I'm not an expert on TV of the time.
Well, I am an expert of TV of that time period because I watched lots of reruns and syndicated shows growing up. There wasn't that much depth, to be honest. And as Star Trek progressed, there were many times when they went to places that most TV wouldn't go, as far as aspects of human nature. And no other TV show, I think the only TV show that maybe did previously was maybe The Twilight Zone, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But that's a whole other discussion. So, and while we're on the subject of TV of the time, now, before we started, you had brought up the whole idea that Gene Roddenberry had originally pitched this as Wagon Train to the Stars when he first pitched it to the network. And for those who are younger, Wagon Train was originally a Western TV show of that time period. And so he told the network, it'll be like the cowboy, because Western shows were so popular. It'll be like the cowboy shows. Instead of horses and carriages, they'll fly spaceships. Instead of six-shooters, they'll have ray guns. And that's kind of how he pitched it.
Right, and Wagon Train was basically this long continuing series where they were going across the U.S. to go west with, and you could have all these different characters popping in for an episode or so.
Yeah.
Because it was a big wagon train.
Okay.
Really big.
And I wonder if they ever managed to meet the end of their journey in that series.
I don't know.
I never got to see it, but I heard of it, and I remember hearing about that show. Well, the network rejected this show, so was this a Wagon Train to the Stars, like he said?
I think maybe it wasn't.
Yeah, I would agree.
It was, I think it was more science fictional than the network was expecting.
I think, yeah, especially when you consider what science fiction was like at the time. And we did a rundown of some of the shows.
Yes.
Like Lost in Space, which was probably one of the most popular of the shows. Had the longest, I think, runtime as far as how many seasons it got. Mm-hmm. But yeah, this was quite, as far as being that whole idea that the network said it was too cerebral for television, this was tremendously cerebral.
Maybe not compared to science fiction stories,
Novels.
which had come out by that time. Short
Yes.
stories, novels,
Yes.
which probably the network wasn't reading.
Yeah.
So to science fiction fans, I think this would have been a really popular show.
Yes.
I don't know why they said, well, try again, do another pilot. It was just very fortunate that they did so.
Yeah. I think the networks, I don't think anybody who really probably was higher up in the networks were into science fiction or read any science fiction. And their only knowledge of science fiction was probably like the shows that they already had, like Lost in Space. Some rocket ships and some monsters. That's science fiction, and of course, lots of shooting and B-movie science fiction.
Explosions.
Which there was a lot of that during the 50s.
Yeah.
You'd had a whole wave of that during the 50s. Alien invaders, all aliens are bad guys. That sort of thing. All alien races are bad guys. And I think that's something that definitely lost. I watched some Lost in Space, and all aliens were bad guys. Unlike in Star Trek, where not all aliens were bad guys. I think that alone was revolutionary about Star Trek.
Some of them were just, mothers protecting their young.
Exactly. Some of them were, which we will find out in later episodes. So let's go ahead and just talk about the episode kind of beat by beat. So we start with the opening titles. And, of course, the main thing is we have no Space, the Final Frontier.
That's
we just
right.
simply have the ship flying about with the opening music. And then we have that wonderful kind of pan-in shot into we kind of hover over the top of the Enterprise, that little dome, and we actually go inside and we see the inside of the ship. They did this in the original version, and they did it, and they improved it in the enhanced special effects version, which we watched the enhanced special effects version.
We did, and that was the first time I've ever seen any of the enhanced episodes.
Ah, okay. Shall I ask what you thought? Because you did some comparisons.
Well, I was very distracted during the episode because I kept wondering, okay, is this enhanced? Is that enhanced? I wonder if this, I think this is, and so that was a little bit distracting. And just philosophically, which you already know, I have problems with the idea of enhancing original series Star Trek. It probably has something to do with the fact that I read a lot of very old novels.
But go ahead and I understand your argument about that, but I would like you to explain it here for everybody that's listening. What your reasoning is.
So, one of the things I like about fiction is that it allows you to live lives that are not your own, to see viewpoints that are not your own, and to actually time travel. Because when you read a 19th century novel, for instance, there's going to be a difference in pacing, a difference in how things are said, what there is said, vocabulary, the manners of the people. There can be an enormous import in whether someone has scribbled a note to you in pencil rather than writing it in ink. There's going to be something that you learn about somebody's character by their vocabulary, the fact that they have vulgar manners, and you're just transported to a different time. You're not caught in being merely modern.
And I feel the same is true with film, with TV shows and movies, because movies and TV shows from 20, 30, 40 years ago are paced very differently.
They are.
And acting styles are very different. Directorial styles are very different. So I agree. I understand what you're saying.
Right. So when you have something like Star Trek, which was a groundbreaking series, I feel that you should see it the way it was made, even if it has a level of technology, a level of special effects that seems really lacking, primitive by our standards now, because it's an artifact of its time, and you lose that dimension if you say, well, let me enhance this, enhance that. And in one case, they did one whole shot absolutely differently. It's, I guess, kind of the way I feel about colorized movies.
I will comment on that because I totally agree with you about colorized movies. And I am 99.9%, 100%, 99.9% in agreement with you on all of this, because I would hate to see a classic film, like a science fiction film like Forbidden Planet, have the special effects updated, because that motion picture was the zenith of special effects at that time. And I want to see it the way it was originally made. I'm okay if you color correct the picture. I'm okay if you get rid of all the scratches on the film, but I want to see it with its original special effects. For some reason, Star Trek, the original series, is the one exception I make where I'm pleased that they did this. Of course, I grew up seeing it unenhanced. I know what it looks like. But to me, the enhancements add a sense of scale that the original series wanted to have, should have had, but couldn't have. But this is my only exception to this rule, is Star Trek, the original series. Otherwise, I'm completely in agreement with you on everything you've just said.
Well, I just really have trouble understanding this, because it did have scale at the time.
At the time, okay.
And that's part of that's
charm?
Part of it.
Okay.
Well, I don't know if you'd say charm.
Okay.
That's part of it's being an artifact of its time. The fact that this was sort of the zenith of special effects. They spent more on this program, and that's why they kept getting further and further behind as they were recording it.
Because of the expense.
Because of the expense and the time it took to do all their special effects. I mean, you commented on the matte paintings in this episode.
Yes.
They weren't doing that kind of thing for any other TV show that I know of.
And the matte paintings in this pilot are gorgeous.
And there's just a ton more special effects than you would have found in any other program at that time. And it's kind of like you want to take a painting from the Renaissance and say, oh, let's redo this so that we can look at it and see it in 3D if we put on these glasses.
Yeah, I get you.
So that's my feeling, and we're going to have to agree to disagree on that.
But I'm glad that, unlike, say, the Star Wars special editions, we actually have the original versions available for us. When you do get the show on Blu-ray, you can watch both.
Yes.
So I appreciate that. So we meet the crew. We of course we get the first beginnings of the plot, where there's this old distress signal that the crew picks up. Spock says it's in the Talos system, and Captain Pike has to decide: do we follow up on this old distress signal, or do we take care of the business we need to take care of? And of course, this is where we begin to see Pike's character as this guy who is becoming very jaded. It's the first time we meet him, and he's very jaded about his position as a captain. And this leads to the scene with him going to his quarters, where we begin to see the relationship between him and Dr. Boyce, as he's referred to in this series, not Dr. McCoy. But already we have the beginnings of this relationship between the captain and the ship's doctor, which will carry over when we redo the show with William Shatner and DeForest Kelley.
Yes, and I think actually instead of saying jaded, I would say that the captain is tired.
Probably better, tired.
Maybe it's because I'm an oldest sibling, but a captain is like an oldest sibling. You have a lot of responsibility.
Okay.
So I'd say he's tired of carrying all of this responsibility.
Mm-hmm. I love that scene in the captain's quarters. First of all, you got that old Victrola-looking TV set thing, whatever it is, there in the middle of the room. It's not a TV, I guess, but it's something. And I love the whole relationship between him and the doctor and the whole way that scene plays out. It's very much, to me, out of a classic 1940s, 50s, early 50s motion picture. The way that scene is paced, the dialogue, and I love Dr. Boyce's comments about how, he brings the captain a martini, and he tells him, sometimes a man will tell his bartender more than he'll tell his doctor. And that's where Pike, fesses up how he's feeling, as Dr. Boyce starts to kind of basically psychoanalyze him, I should say, or counsel him.
Yes.
He's kind of the ship's counselor, so to speak. And then Pike says, well, now you're sounding more like a doctor. And he has that great line, well, we both have the same kind of customers, the living and the dying.
Yeah, and that you're right. That scene could have come out of a military movie.
Yes.
A Civil War movie, lots of stuff.
Yeah. So, but it needs to say Pike is having a crisis of faith about his direction in life, what direction he's chosen, in my opinion, a little bit. And so this whole episode is his whole character arc through line is going to be how he resolves that through this story, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Which I think he does by episode's end. And so now we're back on the bridge. The captain's been called away from his quarters. We're back on the bridge. And they hand him some paper readouts, which is kind of amusing.
Everybody's got clipboards.
Exactly, everybody's got clipboards, and we've got these little paper readouts that look like fax machine readouts, and which they never do again.
No.
In the original series, they phased that out, and they say, wait a minute, we have reason to believe that the distress signal is more current than we think, or for whatever reason, I forget exactly. They realize, okay, we should go and check this out, and Pike makes the decision we should go check out this distress signal. Then Pike says, engines engage. And I guess they hit what's supposed to be called warp drive, though they don't call it warp drive yet. But we get this kind of unusual scene where you have the stars kind of superimpose over the bridge.
Yeah, that was strange. I had forgotten that.
That was very strange. I'm guessing maybe that was, all I could picture was this is their way of saying, okay, they're traveling really fast now. This is warp drive.
And they didn't know what
style.
effects to use yet.
Yeah, this is 60s style warp drive. We're just going to superimpose the outer space background over the bridge, the crew of the bridge, while they're on board the bridge flying. And that's going to be how we show this. Unusual, never used again. Then, of course, we meet the ship's yeoman. We meet this very cute... we don't get a name for her, do we? I don't think.
I don't think so.
Maybe only in the credits, but she's very cute. And she's clearly likes the captain. The captain is very standoffish about her. And this is the beginnings of what will eventually become Captain Kirk and Yeoman Rand. Don't you think?
Well, Yeoman Rand wasn't really anything like this cute little yeoman.
True, she was different. But you can see some similarities, I think.
They were both women.
Okay, well, yeah, but don't you think there was this whole thing where Kirk, I mean, I know in later episodes, Kirk clearly has some attraction to her, but he's trying to... He kind of won't kind of own up to it in the original series, and I felt like there was some of that, kind of some seeds of that plotted in this.
Well,
that's what I read.
Kirk had an attraction to every female character in the series.
That's true, he did.
Did it seem? By the way, did it seem to you that Captain Pike was younger than Captain Kirk, even though Captain Kirk is supposed to be the youngest captain in the fleet?
No, but I would like to know why you felt that.
I don't know why.
They seemed about the same age to me.
Okay.
Yeah, they seemed about the same age. But there is this whole situation where clearly the young yeoman, female yeoman, likes Kirk, and he's very kind of Pike, and he's very standoffish about her. He's kind of hard on her.
He's just lost his previous yeoman.
Yeah.
And
did he?
Yeah, he was killed in their prior engagement.
That's the story that he tells Dr. Boyce about.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that.
Yes, he had just lost his previous yeoman. She was replacing him, and I guess his previous yeoman was male.
Okay.
Because he says that he's just not used to women on the bridge, and obviously not as his yeoman either.
Yeah, and then number one's kind of insulted by this remark.
Yeah.
And then he insults number one again by saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, number one. You're different."
Yeah. And that, and when he tells her that she's got to stay on the ship while they all go down on the planet.
Yeah.
You can just see the eye roll there.
Oh, yeah. She's really not happy about this.
Yeah, and you know that this has happened again and again and again.
Yeah.
And in an alternate universe, if they bought this series, you know that this would be kind of like a repeated element.
And it would eventually hopefully lead to her finally kind of saying enough's enough here.
I think it would have grown.
Yeah.
I mean, the characters would have grown.
Yeah.
But I kind of interrupted you there.
Oh, no. That was all very good stuff. But yeah, it's kind of, now let me ask you this here. Does it feel like this kind of version of Star Trek, this early version, is kind of a boys' club still? Because as much as Roddenberry talked about men and women being equal and all that, Captain Pike does have that line, "I'm not used to having women on the bridge."
Yeah.
It feels like more of a boys' club still.
It does.
And there's mostly men on board the ship if you look closely. As far as officers. You see one or two women. I guess even that was revolutionary for the time.
I suppose.
Of course, how many shows about a starship did we have at that point?
None.
So now the away team gets ready to board the transporter room. And it's the first time we see the transporters. And the transporters, of course, were created initially to save on the budget, so they didn't have to show a ship landing every single episode.
Yes.
But it was such a brilliant idea.
It was.
The transporter. And I can only imagine how that must have played to audiences who sat and screened this, that even the network people who screened this for the first time, like, oh, wow.
Amazingly cool.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I have to think even they were like, even if they didn't like this pilot, they must have thought, well, that was really cool.
Well, I don't know if they did or not, but I'm sure any science fiction person was like, whoa, way cool.
Yeah, transporters. However, though, it's interesting. I should point out in the movie serial, Buck Rogers, the original movie serial starring Larry Buster Crabbe, there is kind of a somewhat similar version of a transporter. They get into like this little elevator type of thing, a little like glass booth thing. And then you kind of see a similar transporter effect where it gets all fuzzy and then they vanish. Huh. And then then they cut to another place somewhere else where they have an adjoining one where they like the transporter, you see them phase in and they're there. And it's like there has to be one on another end. They can't just land somewhere. They have to have another of these cubes on the other side to get there.
Right.
But I should point out that Buck Rogers actually showed that in the 1930s
I didn't
movie
know
serial.
that.
Yeah.
So what kind of an elevator is that anyway?
By radioactivity, it breaks down the atoms of the body to their component parts, and reversing polarity reassembles them wherever desired.
But the concept was in science fiction because I remember an Asimov story.
Yeah.
It's about everybody uses these sort of transporter doors to get from one place to another.
Okay.
And somebody accidentally takes a walk because their door is broken. They have to go down the street to borrow their neighbor's door.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Okay, so I always wondered about I've not read a lot of classic science fiction, and I've always wanted to know how original that concept was, and I'm sure it had to be taken from some science fiction writer at some point.
But you're right. I mean, it was a budgetary budget thing for them.
It was a budget reason, but it was a great creative solution.
And it saves time in the script.
And it was a great creative solution, though. So now we're on the planet, and now we have those beautiful matte paintings that I was talking about. Mm-hmm. I could not be more impressed. I could look at those scenes on the planet over and over again. Matte paintings, and once again, for those of you who are young, nowadays, everything's CGI. You have a partially built set, and then you have the rest of it green screen, and you do the CGI computer-generated imaging to show your planetary backdrop. But back then, they would have done these beautiful glass matte paintings that they would have then shot film against, and then filmed the two elements together to create one picture. And these matte paintings are gorgeous, and that was the technology of the time. I like the fact that during this opening sequence, when they first land on the planet, that rather than get right to the plot, we actually spend a few minutes quietly with no dialogue of them just kind of walking around and exploring. And you kind of get to be the explorer with them during those scenes. It's just very quiet and meditative, They have that moment where we keep hearing this like chiming sound as they're on the planet. And at first you think it's just a sound effect of the soundtrack. But then they come across these plants that are vibrating, and Pike and Spock hold the two plants from vibrating, and then the sound stops. And you realize it's not the soundtrack, it's the sound of these plants making this kind of like chiming noise.
Yeah, that was really nice. And since I first saw shots from this episode in the two-parter,
the menagerie.
The menagerie.
Yes.
That's where Spock, whose character was not set in stone yet in this first pre-pilot,
Smiles. Yes.
Which was, they didn't cut out in the menagerie.
Yeah.
So it was there. Everybody was like, what?
Spock smiled. Because by that time we had his character very firmly established.
Yeah. They took number one's logical mathematical mind and merged it with Spock's ears.
Exactly.
And slightly demonic appearance, which Roddenberry wanted.
Yeah.
And then number one wasn't in the
was
final
no longer
series.
in the series. I remember Roddenberry saying, well, it was too much for the networks, this idea that a woman was second in command of the ship. He would tell this story. And he even said that there was one female, I guess, who worked for the network whose remark was, who does she think she is? Who saw the pilot, And this was, of course, during the time of the beginning of, there have been a number of women's movements throughout the centuries. But this was during the 60s women's movement, the women's liberation movement, which we won't get into because that's a whole other topic. But even a woman who worked for the network said, who the heck does she think she is?
I had never heard that story, and it's hard to believe because number one was a very inoffensive character.
Well, but then again, Roddenberry, from what I've heard, liked to tell stories. So I don't know how much is embellished, but I'll go with what he said at this point.
I mean, I'll accept he said that. It's just... it's hard to believe a female executive said that.
Yeah, but apparently she did. And so we explore on the planet for a while, which I think is very fun. And then they find the shipwrecked crew. Mm-hmm. And now here's where I think it gets really... This is where the mystery starts. They find the crew. There's this meeting between them, and they're talking. And then the camera starts to back up. And next thing we know, it backs up to where now we're at a different point of view, and we see these robed figures, alien figures, watching this meeting. And there's this very dark, ominous music, and we realize they're being watched, and it begins to set up a mystery. And this is why I think Star Trek was such an innovative show. This episode is typical of that, because I think in a lot of shows of the time, everything was being spelled out and spoon-fed to audiences. And today, most TV shows tend to give you a mystery like Star Trek does. Even if it's not a mystery show, you're like, why are people doing these things? Well, you have to wait and see what happens. Wait for the story to explain itself to you. That's more common today in TV because you really have to hook viewers into like, well, why are they doing that? Why is that happening? Well, keep watching.
Well, they did have that in Twilight Zone.
Yes, Twilight Zone. But that was, once again, I think one of the few exceptions, in my opinion. But I think a lot of TV, most episodic TV back then was pretty much spoon-fed, from what I remember of it, of that time period.
I don't know for certain, but certainly a lot of TV was extremely light. Mm-hmm. I Dream of Jeannie, My Mother the Car, Our Miss Brooks.
I think everything was very well explained to you, whereas Star Trek had the daring, I think, to say, why are these people doing this right now? What's going on here? We're not going to tell you just yet. You're going to have to keep watching.
Well, you could be right. I mean, I was going to say, well, but it was science fiction. But then I read more science fiction than I watched. And
so you were more used to it, I think. You were more used to these concepts than, say, the average TV viewer. Or certainly me when I first watched the show. Definitely.
Because as you said, it was like monster movies.
Yeah, I needed everything. At first, I needed you to explain things to me. What was going on here? Where is this taking place? Is this the future? What is this? Is it the present? I was like totally clueless when I first tried to watch this show. But we digress. But this is the beginning of the mystery. And then, of course, the shipwrecked crew disappears. They vanish. And Vina has taken the captain to... I'll back up. Vina is going to show the captain why they're all in such great physical health. And then the shipwrecked crew vanishes. And then Pike is captured. I keep wanting to call him Kirk. Pike is captured by the aliens. And
Vina disappears too.
Vina disappears too, that's right. And then he's captured by the aliens. And so then we go to where a commercial would be. And then Captain Pike wakes up. And then we have this moment where he's just, once again, examining his surroundings. And we're kind of in the same position as him. He doesn't say anything. He just keeps looking around. And he starts to see that there are other creatures or aliens in similar enclosures as him. Almost like a zoo.
And I was really impressed with that scene because you can see part of one of the other enclosures and from his point of view, and you see this shadow moving about, and then you see a little bit of a creature.
Yeah.
And it's very effective
Yeah.
with the limited budget
Yeah.
and the limited effects they had.
Yeah.
How much impact they could get out of that.
Yeah. There's the one sequence where there's a guy in something like a bird costume.
Yeah.
And they run the image backwards. So it has this very eerie kind of effect. Had they run it forwards, it would have looked probably really stupid.
That's what they were doing.
Yeah,
Okay.
they ran the footage backwards as it's moving, and so it has this very bizarre, surreal effect. In fact, it looks like something out of. I know you never watched Twin Peaks, but it looks like something out of Twin Peaks in the Red Room. Some people are moving backwards, and some people aren't.
So you had an uncanny element to it.
It had that very uncanny element to it, and it's a wonderfully surreal moment. And so then finally, the aliens come out and reveal themselves. They're called the Telosians. They reveal themselves to Captain Pike, and Captain Pike, of course, starts demanding answers of them. And I love the kind of condescending nature of the aliens in this. It's hysterically funny, the way they keep predicting his behavior. Now watch, now he's going to do this. And then he does it. It's like, now watch him do this, you know?
Yeah.
Out of frustration, he'll throw himself against the barrier now. And he's about to do it. He stops because he's like, oh, I was about to do that. I'm not going to give in. And he says, oh, screw it. I'll just give in. I'll throw myself at the barrier because I want to do it. And it's wonderful writing. And didn't Roddenberry write this episode, if I'm not mistaken? I believe he did.
I do not recall.
I'm pretty sure he did. I'm sure the internet will correct us if we do. I don't want to stop this conversation just to look it up. But I love their condescending behavior. And then we go back aboard the Enterprise where the crew has reconvened and they're deciding on a plan of action. They took the captain in some kind of enclosure underground. We couldn't get entrance. So now we're going to bring our big guns down and we're going to use the power of the ship to try to blast our way through.
Although I think, if I'm remembering correctly, that Spock points out that because these aliens have triple the human brain power, if they do something like this, they may just wipe them out.
And he's not sure how they could do it, but he's saying because they're so far advanced that I'm sure there's a way they could do this. That we might be terribly ineffective. And of course, he turns out to be right. So now we're back with the Telosians again and Captain Pike. And Vina is brought back again now. And she's wearing the same kind of clothing as the Telosians. Mm-hmm. At which Captain Pike questions, why are you wearing their clothing? And begins to suspect that she may not be an illusion like the rest of the crew was. The aliens make Pike live a past experience he had on another world where he was fighting some sort of barbarian type creature.
Well, they don't just make him relive a past experience. They use his memories of the past to set up a scenario.
Exactly.
And
they add the girl, Vina, as they say, to make it more interesting.
Yes. And has Vina explained why this is being done yet? Not yet. Okay.
Yeah, at that point, Pike's still trying to figure it out. And one thing I like about this is how throughout there's this dialogue interplay with him and the Telosians and Vina, where he's asking all these questions, trying to figure out what's going on. And he's basically the audience's point of view at this point. He's asking all the questions that the audience should be asking. And while it is kind of expository, I think it's really well done as expository dialogue. TV was much more expository at that point in time than it is now. We tend to have movies and TV tend to be show, don't tell. And this episode is trying to give us some mystery, but it uses Captain Pike's dialogue to give us the audience point of view. Well, why are they doing this? Well, why are they doing that? Well, why doesn't he just do this? These are all the questions my mom would have asked if she was watching this with us.
Yeah.
and so he's asking these questions for the audience, and I like how that's done. So Pike has to fight the barbarian. He has to protect Vina. Meanwhile, the crew tries to blast open their way to the underground sanctuary where Pike is being held captive, and they have no success. And then finally, after that scenario is run through, Vina then begins to explain who the Telosians are. Pike finds out about their race and how they have this power of illusion and how they have aliens from across the universe that they can experience dreams and fantasies, virtual reality basically, through all these different alien races.
Because they're telepathic.
Because they're telepathic. But she also says they're addicted to it. These aliens are addicted.
That's right. And it's really a very subversive topic for a television show to be bringing up.
Yes, especially at this time period. Even today, it's a subversive topic to be bringing up. But for the 1960s, you know, they used to call TV the boob tube. And they used to talk about TV being just this great time sucker. And TV just being this vast wasteland.
And a babysitter.
And here's this TV show saying, this is what happens when you get addicted to virtual reality, to realities that aren't real, you know, to stories that aren't real, too much of it. And yeah, you're right, very subversive message. The Telosians then punish Vina for saying too much at that point, and her reaction is really frightening. When they start to punish her, she like screams, "No, don't punish me." And then she vanishes. And what's really odd is that the only thing left is the clothing.
Which doesn't make a lot of sense.
No, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Although I suppose you could say, oh, well, the Telosians gave him the illusion that just her clothing was left.
And maybe to strike an emotional chord in him.
Yeah. But just to the viewer, I was like, what?
Yeah, why didn't she just vanish entirely with the clothes? But it's still there. But
and maybe she is still there because, as Spock points out later on, if their enemy can fool them with illusions,
there's no limit.
There's no limit. You don't know what's actually happening.
Yeah. But I think her reaction is tremendously effective when she says, "Don't punish me." Mm-hmm. When she screams right before she vanishes, I think it's just tremendously effective and even frightening to watch, in my opinion. So then, you know, Pike gets mad at them. He's talking to one of the Telosians, and then the Telosians punish Pike. And next thing he knows, he's in a fire pit and he's melting. Mm-hmm. Parts of him are melting. That's right. They punish him because he doesn't want to eat the food they've given him, or something along those lines. Now, what's interesting about that is when they stop the illusion, the Telosian says, "From a fable you heard as a child."
Yeah, and you know, Star Trek, or maybe Roddenberry, always had this kind of antipathy towards religion.
Yeah, he did. He was very well.
It was there in the very early,
very outspoken atheist. Yeah.
Very, very early in the series, you could see that.
But this is an alien culture, and so to this alien culture, and of course, I remember even asking you when I watched it. I don't know if I watched it with you, but when I was a kid, I said, "What was the fable? What was the fable?" And you told me he was in hell. I thought, but that's the Bible. But to an alien culture, that would be a fable. To an alien culture, that would seem a fable to them.
Right. But
Roddenberry
he
was
was having him say not a belief, but a fable.
Okay, I get what you're saying. Yeah. I get what you're saying. Okay. But I think it was an interesting little bit, the way that was played.
And then what was even more effective, and why Pike actually consumes the nutritious drink, is that he says there are other things buried deeper in your mind.
Yeah. That are even more painful. That
we could use as punishment. And then he drinks it, which, you know, kind of reminded me of that bit in Voyage of the Dawn Treader, where the ship sails towards an island where dreams come true.
And we should point out this is Chronicles of Narnia.
In Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. And at first the crew on the ship is saying, "A place where dreams come true?" And the survivor they've picked up says, "No, you don't understand. Not daydreams, nightmares."
Okay.
So that particular place where he says something buried deeper in your mind.
That's even more unpleasant.
Right.
And then Pike says, "Okay, I'll drink the food."
Yeah. Because all of us
have horrible places in our nightmares that we don't want to go
to.
And
in our minds where
we don't want to go. Yeah, exactly. I think that's one of the brilliant things about this episode, and I'm pretty sure this is Roddenberry's writing, is just how much he was willing to explore aspects of the human psyche that other TV shows wouldn't, even at this time. Twilight Zone would do it, but not too many other shows would. I'm not saying he was the first. Mm-hmm. Twilight Zone was definitely willing to explore the darker aspects of human nature in a way that most TV wouldn't. But this show was definitely willing to do that.
Although, on the whole, Star Trek was an extremely positive
view
of the future.
Oh, yeah, I totally agree. That's one of its primary appeals, is what a positive view of the future it is. Oh, that's right. I have to bring this up here. So he drinks the food, and Pike says, why are you should be punishing me, not her. I'm the one who's not cooperating. And the alien says, now you're feeling sympathy for her. Excellent. And he has this line, excellent. And I laughed out loud. The reason why I laughed, I know you have never watched The Simpsons, but Homer Simpson's boss, and I have to wonder now if this isn't somehow tied into it, because I'm sure the writers of The Simpsons were probably big Star Trek fans, because who isn't who works in Hollywood? But Homer's boss, Mr. Smithers, would always have, in so many episodes, concoct this evil maniacal plan against Homer Simpson. And he'd always rub his hands together. And he'd go, excellent.
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 And when I heard the alien say that, all I could think of was Mr. Smithers from The Simpsons. I thought, oh man, I will just bet you that someone in the writing crew of The Simpsons modeled, the first time they ever did that on a Simpsons episode, modeled that after the aliens and the Telosians in Star Trek. Sorry, little side tangent, had to go there.
You could be right, and but to the original audience seeing it before The Simpsons existed, it still would have served to make you horribly frustrated and furious.
Yes.
With the aliens.
No matter what you do, you're playing into their hands. Mm-hmm. No matter what you do. These are really good alien antagonists because there seems to be no direction you can go where they can't outwit you because of their power of illusion.
Yet.
And they're manipulating your minds. Yet. Of course, yet. Next thing we know, Pike is in another illusion now where he's back home. Only Vina's there, and now she's his wife. And of course, Pike refers to this in his conversation with Dr. Boyce earlier in the show where he talks about wanting to go back home again. There's that wonderfully funny line where, once again, Pike is questioning about the Telosians to Vina. And she says, honey, have you forgotten I get my headaches when you talk strange like this? And she's just trying to get him to shut up.
Right.
Please, I don't want to be punished again.
Just play along.
Please just play along. Please play husband and wife. I love that line. I never laughed at that line so hard when I was younger. Mm-hmm. But now I think that line is just hysterical. So Pike begins to uncover their plans, starts to realize what they're really trying to do, which is get him and Vina to mate to create generations of people who will help them rebuild their civilization.
Well, they don't know that yet, but he does know that...
He starts to suspect it, because he mentions that. He mentions something about building an army of slaves to... Is that what they're doing?
That's at the very end of the show.
Okay.
That's at the end of the episode.
Okay.
But however, they have established that the creatures in the other enclosures are the descendants of creatures they brought back eons ago from other planets, and that and then Pike says, then in other words, they need one of each.
Exactly. Yeah,
one of each sex to reproduce.
Be able to keep the species going so they can continue to feed off their dreams. And then, of course, Vina begins to say, since you don't want to play along with this, we thought you'd want to play husband and wife, this nice, pleasant little dream here. Maybe what we really should play is what you can't have, And she says, being a captain, you have to be so formal, so upright all the time.
And proper.
So next thing we know, Vina is now this green dancing slave girl. And we find out, and of course, these become a part of Star Trek lore, the Orion slave girls. And there have been other stories about these characters since then. But here it's just kind of a throwaway thing. Mm-hmm. And of course, it looks like one of those Cecil B. DeMille, period pieces.
Exactly.
Where you've got like the emperor and all that, and you've got the dancing slave girls and all that.
You've got these slimy merchants.
You've got all these slimy merchants there, yes. And they're all kind of taunting him and teasing him like,
wouldn't you say it was worth a man's soul?
And then he runs away. And then he finds himself kind of entrapped. Suddenly, there's no longer he leaves. He goes inside an enclosure. And then now there's no longer an exit, and she's there. Vina's about to put the moves on Pike, and then we cut to the Enterprise again. And they've got another plan. But I don't think they ever tell us what the plan is, but they're going to go back to the planet's surface. And there's Spock, and there's the yeoman, and there's number one. Mm-hmm. And there's one other male officer, if I'm not mistaken. But then when they transport, only the women leave. And Spock yells out, "The women!" The women!
Right.
I do have to wonder, though, why was the yeoman on the away team? What was she going to do?
They needed her later in the plot.
I know, they needed her later in the plot. But, I didn't think about this when I was younger, but it is one of those little plot contrivances. Why the heck did you... Yes, let's have the yeoman go on the away team.
Well, she had a blaster just like everybody else.
I guess.
I don't know.
But I would think you might have an officer that's probably more trained. A yeoman, I can't imagine being trained in combat. I realize, and you realize the silliness of it, but obviously she's there because the plot needs her to be. Next thing we know, they're now in that cubicle with Pike and Vina. And
I thought this was really cool. When they materialize and they look at Pike and Vina, Pike is just standing there motionless.
Yeah.
And Vina is just standing there with him. I think she's touching him, but... or almost...
She's kind of got one of her hands on his shoulder.
Right. So they are living their illusion.
Yes.
And it's a chance for the audience to see what's actually going on when they are in one of those illusions.
And who knows what's happening at this point. We don't know what's happening. We don't know how far Vina and Pike have gone in this dream. We don't know if Pike's resisting her at this point or if he's not resisting her anymore. And then suddenly they both realize there's these two other people in the room with them. And then Vina's very upset. She says, no, I almost had him. Or I think she says something like that. I was so close. Something along those lines. She's frustrated.
She says she wants to keep trying.
Yeah, she wants to keep trying because she really does like Pike. Mm-hmm. And we know she's real at this point. So then the aliens come in and say, well, since you don't seem to want the woman we've provided, we have two more for you to choose from now. This is another interesting bit. The aliens kind of reveal that number one's always been interested in Pike. And she's very embarrassed when they reveal this. You can see the embarrassment in her eyes.
They also give you a little background in saying that although she appears to be emotionless.
Yes, that's right.
So that
very Spock-like.
Mm-hmm. She actually has had fantasies about you.
Yeah.
So you know a little bit about her, and that she's highly intelligent and would produce intelligent offspring.
Yes.
And they compare her to the yeoman. They compare the yeoman and say, however, this one has youth, a lot of vigor, and a strong feminine drive.
Yes.
So basically embarrass both women.
Yes, both of them are embarrassed because they obviously both like Captain Pike. They both have thought about him in that way. They're kind of embarrassed that he knows this now. And once again, I think this is also kind of very revolutionary for television of the time to kind of go to these places. The whole idea that we hide feelings that we have a lot of times for other people that we don't talk about in public. I think a lot of TV didn't go there, at least not in this way. Maybe I'm wrong.
I don't know. It just seemed to me that they were filling in the character background.
Yeah, that's true. They are giving us a lot of character background in these scenes. And that's another way that the writing's brilliant, in my opinion. Because they're doing that within the context of the story. And it moves the story along. So now we're back on the bridge, and Spock is basically trying to run away at this point.
Spock is trying to run away.
Well, he's trying to escape. He's telling the crew,
that's right.
We've got to escape.
We got to go before it's too late.
Yeah, before it's too late. Because at this point, they can do anything to us now. We've got, our only choice is to get out of here. It's the right choice, of course. Mm-hmm. But I think it is kind of funny. I think of Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Run away, run away. When the two female officers, number one and the yeoman, appear in the cubicle, they both got their phasers or blasters or whatever they're called at this point. Pike immediately grabs those blasters. They don't seem to work, but he can't be sure because he can't trust anything he sees. And then later they're all asleep. One of the aliens is sneaking in to try to get those guns away because they don't want him to have those, because those are real guns. Those are real lasers, and they don't want him to have it. And Pike pretends to be asleep because he kind of sees him out of the corner of his eye, and he just kind of pretends like he's nodded off. And the Telosian reaches in, and that's when Pike grabs him. Now, of course, I never thought about this watching it when I was younger, but I think about it now. If they're telepathic, they should have known that Pike wasn't asleep, unless he was really putting up those hate thoughts.
Right, because I don't remember if you've said this yet, but they discovered that the Telosians can't read your mind when you are full of a primitive, fierce emotion such as hate.
That's right, and we didn't say that, but that is earlier in the story. You're right.
And the problem with that, however, as Vina points out, is that you cannot maintain that level
of hatred constantly.
Constantly.
Yeah. And it's true, you can't. You just the human brain just can't do that. So I'm going to have to assume that Pike was putting up so much hate thoughts in his mind, but then they couldn't read him, and they just assumed he was asleep.
Probably this was just a plot hole, but your your filling in of the plot hole would be what fans do.
Okay, all right. So I'm making excuses is what I'm doing basically.
But it works.
It works. Okay. I mean, okay. I'll be the apologist in this point. So the aliens try to get the guns away, and then Pike grabs the alien by the throat. The alien tries to fool Pike by making it believe it's like a big pig-like monster, gorilla pig-like monster crossbreed, and Pike doesn't believe it. And now Pike finally has the upper hand on the Telosians because he's got the gun at his head, and he's saying, well, let's see if this gun really works. Let's see if this is an illusion or not, because I'm willing to just blow your head off, and then you won't have any more illusion now, will you?
And, here, I think we see another sort of core belief in Star Trek.
Uh-huh.
And that is, humans must live free.
Yes.
They would rather die than be slaves. And they are the most violent and dangerous creatures in the universe.
Yes. Which comes up later in the episode too. But you're right. Yeah, these are kind of core beliefs of Star Trek. And I think that's one of the great things about Star Trek is that it does acknowledge that we are it says we're the most violent and dangerous beings in the universe, but we're able to rise above it.
Yes.
And I think that to me is one of the greatest messages about Star Trek overall, is the ability to rise above your most base instincts and be something better. And that's to me is why I've always come back to Star Trek.
It rings true.
It rings true, yes. So they take the alien, they realize the alien drops the illusion, they realize that there was a huge hole blasted in that cage they were in, whatever you want to call it. And so they leave with the alien and they go back up to the planet's surface. So they're back on the surface where the alien says, haha, I always wanted you on the surface anyways because we need you here to start mating and raise other humans. And then at this point...
which they're going to guide their evolution over eons so that they will become artisans and...
technicians, he says. Artisans and technicians, yeah. Not
Yeah.
slaves, but artisans and technicians. And that's when number one becomes very proactive. I think she's been very proactive throughout the whole show. But she really makes the big decision to put her gun on to overload self-destruct. And because she says it's wrong to create an entire generations of slaves. Even though the alien is saying you're going to be artisans and technicians and build a society here in our world.
And serve us.
And serve us, basically. You're still slaves.
Yes.
And this goes back to what you said just a moment ago about humans not wanting to be captives. And the Telosian even says this. I can't believe this. You don't want to be, even when we make it pleasant for you, you don't want to be captives. And at this point then, some of the rest of the aliens come on board the planet. And I should back up and say earlier, we had a sequence where the Enterprise's memory banks are being raided by the Telosians. And they're learning all there is to know about humanity. And then the other Telosians transmit this to the one Telosian that Pike has taken captive. And the aliens all realize, we can't use you. You're too violent. And you just can't handle captivity, even when it's pleasant. And they basically say, we surrender at this point. We give up. You're free to go.
Because they haven't found any other species in the universe
who is adaptable.
Who is as adaptable as humans.
Yeah, Star Trek's a very pro-human show, if you've ever noticed.
Yeah, which is probably one of the reasons why I enjoyed the original series a lot more than Next Generation.
Okay, we'll have to talk about that sometime.
Yeah.
Okay.
But then I would have to watch Next Generation again.
Yeah.
I don't know if I want to go there.
You don't think Next Generation was a pro-human show?
Well, we should talk about that another time.
That's another show. We'll talk about that another time. Okay. But so anyways, though, and then of course Pike says, so that's it. And it's kind of got this wonderful sense of being, it's climactic, but it's wonderfully anticlimactic in my opinion.
Well, the thing is that they're giving you the impression that these guys, I think Roddenberry wanted you to give the impression that these guys are so amazingly evolved. They've got brains the size of a planet.
Yeah.
And it's, to them, you're just, we can't use you. You know?
Yeah. You're just not going to work. Next.
Yeah. And it's a good way to show that.
Yeah.
In a very quick way.
Yeah. And Pike says, of course, not even an apology. That's it. After all this, not even an apology. You tortured us. You played with our minds and everything. And the other alien says, well, the fact that we can't use you is going to pretty much mean the extinction of our species. Is that good enough for you? Is that enough retribution? We're dead. Our species is dead in the water now, because we couldn't make use of you guys because you just were too violent. So basically, they're going to go back to the ship again, and Vina tells Pike she can't go. The 2 women officers are transported back to the Enterprise, and Pike learns why Vina can't go, and we see Vina, and the aliens show Vina how she really looks. She's incredibly deformed and scarred and hunchbacked. She explains that, they found her in the wreckage. She was the only trans survivor, barely alive. She describes herself as having been just a lump of flesh. And the Telosians put her back together so everything worked, but they had no guide for how what a human looks like. It's kind of the best description. Well,
it was sort of the best they could do with their budget.
With their special, which I love the sequence where they slowly start to rapid lap dissolve the footage. They probably started with makeup and then slowly took it away and then reversed the shot. Ran the film in reverse to make her start to look more and more uglier and scarred and hunchback as she slowly changes and transforms in front of his eyes.
And you're only seeing her like from the shoulders up, and so you can imagine that she looks even worse elsewhere.
Probably, yeah.
So sometimes what you don't show is more effective than what you do. Show,
especially when you have a limited budget. The one Telosian says it was necessary for you to understand that her reasons for staying were sincere. And now these aliens are being very sincere and being very transparent with Pike at this point. They have nothing else to do with this. There's no reason not to be at this point. And so Kirk goes back to the Enterprise. He never doesn't tell when number 1 asks him, well, what happened to Vina? He just says, she's staying and I agree with her reasons. He just that's her private business. But we also, of course, before he goes, he tells the aliens, you're going to give her back her illusion of beauty. And then the alien says, very almost like parent-like and more. And has this almost like nurturing parent-like quality that they haven't had previously when the alien says, and more. And then Pike looks, and there she is. She's beautiful again, but Pike's with her.
As an illusion.
As an illusion as well. And he's watching her with him, an illusion of him.
But I don't think the Telosian is parent-like. It's more like the owner of a pet.
Yeah, you could say that.
I think that was really their attitude.
But nurturing. I think kind of like they're like, oh, we do care for these creatures.
Well, they state, we try to make our pets happy.
They do say that.
They do say that, even though they have to discipline them sometimes.
I don't think they say pets. I think they say specimens.
They say specimens.
But yeah, you can read that as pets.
Yeah,
very much.
But that's their attitude towards
the rest of us.
The rest of us,
the
because
rest of the universe.
Brains the size of a planet.
Yeah, because we've got huge brains and we're a lot more smarter. Okay.
And so that's why the viewer is not supposed to like them.
Yeah. So she leaves with the illusion of Pike. And I remember thinking, who knows what else they put there? Like, they could have even had a whole scenario play out where Pike says, I'm staying with you after all, Vina. I can only stay with you. And she really believes that he didn't go back to the ship. I love the fact that she kind of gets the storybook ending. She gets the fairy tale storybook ending. I don't know. For some reason that just resonated with me very strongly.
Well, they'll probably stop punishing her.
Yeah.
Because...
There's
no need to now.
Yeah. They're just going to basically let her live in her illusion world for the rest of her life. And of course, they're going to feed off those illusions as well. So we're back on board the bridge. Pike has another encounter with the yeoman, the female yeoman, and she asks him, who's going to be Eve, and Pike tells her that's
just out of curiosity.
Out of curiosity, yeah. And he's like, he tells her, he doesn't say that's none of your business, but he basically says that's none of your business. Back to work. We're professionals here, basically, is kind of what he says. Dr. Boyce wonders, what the heck are you talking about? And Pike says to him, all ship's doctors are dirty old men, basically. He has that's a great line. But he basically tells him it's none of your business. And then we take off, and that's it. And we're ready for more adventures.
And it, here in this very first pre-pilot episode.
Pre-pilot.
We're ending with a light joke type of thing, which was very common
for the rest
Star
of the series.
Trek.
This episode informs a lot of what's to come, in my opinion. I want to just mention that I think the Telosians are really well designed in this show. I understand they used women to play them. I think I read they tried to use men, but they needed people who were very light of frame, and they used women. And then they built, of course, those big heads around them. But I thought that the Telosians looked especially good as alien designs.
They look very alien.
Yeah, and very effective. Let's get into closing comments now. final thoughts? Any like things you'd like to say? I know we wrote ourselves a couple questions. What did you think of this episode back in the day when you maybe first saw it?
Well, and remembering that I first saw it as sort of in the menagerie, as a look back at the past.
Yeah.
It was convincing to me as past.
Yeah.
A Star Trek's past, but it looked almost too primitive to be in the time frame that it was supposed to be in, which they did a lot of improvement on the look and feel of Star Trek between
the two pilots,
and the rest of the series. I was noting as we were watching this some of the things like those, I don't know what they were, viewer screens. They looked like desk lamps with crook necks coming up out of the consoles.
Yeah, with view screen communication.
And then we had this sort of see-through communicator, which they really zero in on at Kirk's
quarters. The first time you see it, so you can
see all the cool electronics inside. It's almost like see-through.
Look at this.
Yeah. The technology there was very primitive looking.
Yeah.
More so than the real Enterprise that we ended up with.
Yeah. They made a lot of improvements between the first pilot and the second pilot. And then after the second pilot, they made more improvements to the look of the series.
Yes, they did.
To where it looks like the series that we now recognize. But yeah, it's amazing how much this episode informs the rest of the series in so many ways. I, like I said, first saw it as part of the menagerie. And I knew, of course, it was from the original pilot, which at that point we'd never seen.
Which I knew too.
But then years later I would see it. I think I remember, I thought, that was pretty cool. But as time has gone on, this has become a real favorite of mine. And you had brought up, before we started talking about this, about what if the network had decided, we'll take this version of the show, and what might have happened. What Star Trek might have been like with this crew instead.
In an alternate timeline.
Yeah.
So what do you think it would have been like?
I think, what would have been like without William Shatner? It boggles the mind.
Well, I liked Christopher Pike.
I like Christopher Pike, and I like Kirk too. I like them both.
They had different personalities, but they were both good captains.
Yeah. I've always thought if Paramount wanted to do a spin-off Star Trek show, they could do rather than what they're doing right now, which I gave up after 3 episodes. I will, and I'm speaking of Star Trek Discovery here. If the critics who are following the show tell me after it's done that it's worth watching, then I'll probably rent it on DVD maybe or Blu-ray and watch it then and check it out. But at this point, I'm not interested. But if they really wanted to do a Star Trek prequel series, why not do a show about Captain Pike and Spock and Number One? Why not do that show? Like you just cast a different actor as Spock. You've only ever had this one show. So it would be very easy to accept recasting these characters. We've already reaccepted the recasting of these characters in the J.J. Abrams Star Trek verse.
And there are seeds that you could use in the original pilot, though they probably wouldn't.
To continue with
the relationships between the characters.
Yeah. I think it would be a fun show.
It probably would.
I think it'd be a very cool show to do.
It probably would.
So as far as, like I said, when I first saw it, I thought it was pretty good. But now I really like this story, and I really like how ahead of its time it was dealing with the idea of virtual reality and how that could cripple a whole society if we become too addicted to it.
Oh, that was a good theme, although I think I was not as impressed with it as you were, although I thought it was good because, I had read a lot of science fiction by that time. One of the things that I thought about when I watched it this time was there were some things that kind of had me a little, I don't know, things I didn't like when Captain Pike is talking to the Doctor in his quarters, he refers to their engagement on Rigel.
Yeah.
And it talks about armor and castle and all this stuff. And then you see it in the illusion scene.
Yeah.
And, they've got the girl in the medieval gown, and you've got all these spears and maces, and it just didn't seem very science fictional to me. And it just seemed like, okay, that's probably what the network thought would be kind of science fictional. It just didn't seem to fit in a Star Trek type of universe.
I think I would say this is one of those instances where it just comes down to budget. And it's like, well, we've got these sets from this other show. We've got this costumes from this other show. And I think that happens a lot in Star Trek, the original series, that the reason why you had so many environments that they went to that looked like cultures from Earth's past was because, well, we've got these sets, we've got these costumes. That's why we're going to have this episode where it's basically Captain Kirk Indian Chief, you know, because we've got these Indian costumes from all the Western shows we're doing. So we're going to just fit that in.
And that's why so many planets look like California deserts.
Exactly, because we can go to the California desert and shoot, doggone it.
Yeah, so I didn't like that little aspect. And the rest of it that I noticed this time was just sort of the charm of past futuristic stuff.
Yeah.
Like the papers sliding out of the computer readout, the metal clipboards.
Yes, which they never used again.
They
started using
the desk lamps.
They started using, what were those devices? What were those devices that weren't iPads, but the predecessor to the iPad?
Well, they had these plastic thingies.
But they had a stylus.
With a stylus.
Exactly,
yes.
and they had it like a glass screen.
And you could sign on them
and they would write on it, but it wasn't paper anymore.
Yeah.
But there was a device, I can't remember what it was called, before the iPad, that used a stylus.
Oh, yeah, I can't remember what it's called. The Newton.
Thank you. That's our producer talking. But the Newton, that sort of thing. But at any rate, though, they had those, and so that was futuristic.
Right. So I guess all of the futuristic things that they had put into this prequel, pre-pilot, that didn't make the cut, that were improved with the second one. So I just would see them and say, oh, that's so sweet.
Charming. It's retro future.
Yeah.
Retro futuristic now. And so now, favorite thing about this episode, the scene with Dr. Boyce and Captain Pike, like I said earlier. I love that conversation. I love that line of, well, now you're sounding more like a doctor than a bartender. Well, we both have the same exact kind of customers, the living and the dying. I just love that line. I love that whole interplay between the two of them, that whole scene. You know, a man either faces life head on or he shrivels up, you know, and dies, or however he says it. I can't remember the exact words, but I love that scene. That's my favorite thing.
Well, that would have to be among my favorites also, because Star Trek had a lot of these little kinds of conversations between characters, which told more about them, about their relationship, about that. That was a very Star Trek.
And they
sort of
examined
thing.
the human condition at the same time.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
So they had it here as they had it in real Star Trek, and that was always one of my favorite things about Star Trek.
Least favorite thing. It's hard for me to say anything about this one, except I guess maybe what I already said, that why didn't the aliens realize that Pike was pretending to be asleep? But I explained it. I made an excuse for it, so I guess. But that would be my least favorite thing. And why is the yeoman being put on the away team, except for the fact that the plot needs her to be? Okay,
so you would have liked some of the plot holes closed up.
Well, what else were you going to do? You just had to find a better reason for the yeoman to be there. Of course, they could have just grabbed the yeoman. They could have just shown the yeoman like in her quarters, brushing her hair, and whoop, then suddenly they just grab her, you know. But I guess they couldn't just do that. They have to actually get her transported onto the planet before they can actually use her, right? They actually use the transporter.
Yeah.
I guess they could have just used illusion to get the crew members to transport her, thinking they're doing something else.
Well, they could have done anything, but
they didn't. They did
what
they did.
But we also have to make it not too complicated for the viewer.
Sometimes the needs of the plot outweigh the needs of the logic.
That's right.
Yeah.
My least favorite thing. Well, I already mentioned the sort of little going to Rigel.
Talking about that, having the
he makes some remark about swords and armor, and like, what are these guys doing?
It could have looked more
armor?
alien. It could have. They could have made.
Well,
some
it's just it just sounded like like I don't know, Buck Rogers or something.
Yeah.
So
true. Okay.
But I really didn't have any strong. Besides, I didn't have any strong. Thing I liked.
I think it's hard to dislike this particular episode.
It is kind of hard to dislike it, and it would have been cool to have seen it, at the time it was made. It would have been so, as you said, groundbreaking, different, which Star Trek itself was.
Yeah.
Oh, one of the other things that struck me, going back to what do you think of it now, is the fact that you mentioned everybody was male, pretty much.
Yeah.
But also, everybody was white.
Yeah, not a whole lot of ethnicity.
There was one guy who might have been kind of Asian.
There was one guy in the transporter room who looked
room.
Asian, and that's about it. But everybody was pretty much white.
Yeah, so and in fact, a lot of them had blue eyes, too.
They sure did. A lot of blue eyes there. but we didn't have a whole lot of ethnicity that we would have later.
Yes.
You know, where we began to see more all over not just on the bridge, but all across the crew, and a lot more women officers too.
Yeah.
So that was to come. We have to credit the original pilot for having a woman second in command, though.
Yes.
I
liked that very much.
Very outrageous thing to do back then.
Because it was just treated as a normal thing.
Exactly.
Although, why then was he so not used to women on the bridge?
Exactly.
Probably because number one had learned how to deal with the boys.
Probably so. They probably thought of her as one of the boys.
Yeah.
And so he no longer thought of her as a woman, which of course which kind of ticked off number one. I guess that's really my least favorite thing, is this contradiction where, the whole fact that Pike says, you know, I'm just not used to having a woman on the bridge. And, well, you've got a woman. I guess that's probably I should change my mind. That's my least favorite thing now. That's probably a much better least favorite thing to talk about. So there we go. So any other final thoughts from you?
No, I guess not.
Okay, none from me. And so if you stayed with us this far, we thank you so much for taking this journey with us here on the original pilot for Star Trek The Cage. And hopefully if we come back to do this again, we will then start with the second pilot, Where No Man Has Gone Before, if I have the title right. And we'll do one of these on that episode. And let us know what you think of both the original pilot, The Cage, and let us know what you think of the show.
And tell us what things we got wrong.
Exactly. Tell us what we got wrong. If we got certain facts wrong, you know, we're not above that because we are learning too as well. But once again, please subscribe to the channel. And if you do subscribe, be sure to hit notifications so you can know when new videos are being made. And otherwise, thank you so much for watching, everybody. And we'll look forward to checking out your comments. Take care. Bye-bye.